So I want to welcome everybody to our Love in the Long Path webinar. There is a chat feature that is here, and so I've put a few little messages that are in there, just welcoming you all. Feel free to put any questions that you have into the chat. And there'll be time at the end of our presentation to have those questions answered. There's also, I have links to Heather's information, her website and her blog and her Facebook page. So those links are all there. And if you look under files, you'll see that there are some files that you can download that are all about Love in the Long Path, her book. So there's quite a few things, resources that y'all can get during this and things that you could use as well. So I want to thank you all for attending tonight's webinar on Love in the Long Path with Heather Houskeeper. My name is Lauren Bohr. I'm the education coordinator for the public and youth programs at Mohonk Preserve. I'm going to be monitoring and facilitating this whole presentation, so I'll monitor the chat, of course, for your questions. So before we do introduce our presenter, I just want to remind everyone of a couple of things. Again, if you have questions, they can go right into the chat. But there will be points that you can ask questions. So this is being recorded, and our conversation in the chat is also being recorded. So please be mindful and respectful in the chat, as I'm sure you all will be, for this presentation. So I'd like to introduce everyone this evening to our presenter, Heather Houskeeper. She's an herbalist and a long-distance hiker. So she's through-hiked the Appalachian Trail, Mountains to the Sea Trail, the Long Path, the Florida Trail, and is the first person to have hiked the Finger Lakes Trail and all of its 6 branches in one continuous trek. So that's pretty great. So in her profession as the Botanical Hiker, Heather guides others into the natural world through seminars, workshops, plant walks, striving to deepen their relationship with the natural world and its botanical inhabitants. If you want to know more about that, of course, you can check out thebotanicalhiker.com. And also, I'm going to totally do our programming that's coming up with you this fall. In September and October, she's going to be leading edible and medicinal plant walks on preserved land. Registration is open for that. So after this presentation, head on over to our website and register for those. Heather is also the wild food columnist at Dirt Magazine and the author of 2 guidebooks about edible and medicinal plants. And recently published the first narrative book, Love in the Long Path, which this presentation is about. So you get to learn more about that as well. So of course you can learn more about her through social media on Facebook and the blog and website. And again, those links are right there in the chat. So that's all there. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Heather for our presentation this evening on Love and the Long Path. So I will mute myself and I'll turn it over to you.
So firstly, I'd love to just thank you all for coming tonight. It's a real pleasure to share my story through hiking the Long Path with my fiance, Scott Weiss, and also to share about my new book, Love in the Long Path, which this is my copy with lots of little tabs for tonight's webinar. But again, thank you for attending. So firstly, I want to put a suggestion out there, and that is that each of us, I believe, can cultivate a love story with the Long Path. The Long Path for many years called me, and I kind of somewhat danced around it on other long distance trails I did. I first intersected it on the Appalachian Trail in Harriman State Park, and then later came upon it again on the Finger Lakes Trail at its, at that time, its eastern terminus. That terminus has since been bumped up to Slide Mountain, but at the time it was, well, I guess that's the Long Path too. But anyway, I danced around this trail for a while, and it was kind of in the back of my mind that I needed to explore it more. And for me, it took the right person to begin to kind of craft that dream and that vision of actually through hiking the trail. Scott and I got to know the Long Path better through our day hikes and overnight hikes, in which we would just literally find ourselves on the long path. We plan our route. We didn't know it was the long path until we were out there, and oh, lo and behold, we're seeing blazes. Or we'd start to plan our route on the map, and sure enough, at some point we'd intersect with the long path. So we fell in love with it the more that we explored. And I think part of what stalled me in exploring it sooner was that it does travel through a region I'm familiar with. I live in Milford, Pennsylvania. I've long lived in the Northeast. I was born and raised here. Lived down south for a good number of years, but chose to return back north. And I guess it's sometimes not as alluring to decide to hike hundreds of miles through a region one's already familiar with. But the long path very much has the power to illuminate places that we are already familiar with. And it very much did that for both Scott and I. Just shone light on places we didn't even know existed that were kind of virtually in our backyard. And hiking too, even through small towns, you get to appreciate them in such a deeper way than if you're just driving through or stopping in for lunch or what have you. So in my book, Love in the Long Path, I very much strove to highlight that illumination that the trail has to offer, and also our experience hiking it as a couple. There were plenty of obstacles and challenges, and also many rewarding points as well, to reach a goal that we both shared and both very much wanted to complete. So anyway, without further ado, I would like to take you on a virtual hike of the long path through a slideshow, tell you a little bit about my experience, and also read you some excerpts from the book as I go along. So I'm going.
Ooh, I see stuff.
Wow, it's getting rather interesting. Okay. What do you see now? Do you see a slideshow?
I do see a slideshow, so you can, yes. And I see, yay!
Oh my goodness. All right. Thank you all so much for your patience. I really appreciate it. All right. Okay, let's get the show on the road. So let's begin with giving you a simple map of the long path's route. So it begins down in New York City, travels into the Hudson Highlands, through Orange County into the Shawangunk, about 100 miles nearly through the Catskills, into the Shohari Valley, and finally the Capital District, where it ends in John Boyd Thatcher State Park. And it is presently blazed, I believe, at least to the Mohawk River. And they are working on extending that into the true Adirondacks. But as of present, the official trail for an end-to-end designation ends at John Boyd Thatcher State Park. So it travels 358 miles. It took us 32 days, and we started on September 4th, finished October 6th. So the trail begins at the West 175th Street subway station there in Manhattan, and you can see we were quite excited to be beginning our journey. And then you make your way almost immediately over the George Washington Bridge, which is quite the experience as a hiker. There were lots of cyclists and runners and other walkers, and then you've got, all those cars zipping by. You can feel the bridge vibrating beneath you. But you can also see the Palisades Cliffs to come and the Hudson River flowing beneath. And despite all this very urban activity, we're pleasantly surprised to find plants. I'll read you an excerpt. Walking back across the bridge, now less distracted by the stream of people around us, we saw something we had not expected to see. The plants. A multitude of weeds sprung from the cracks and sediment that had collected on shallow shelves of the cliff face. silvery mugwort leaves, yellow plumes of goldenrod, purple flowering faces of spiderwort, and white star-shaped asters, all medicinal or edible plants, carving out a home wherever they could sprout a seed. I wondered if these plants had a consciousness, and if so, just what their impressions might be from their lifelong perch along the busiest bridge in the world. So here on the left-hand side, this is a photo of wineberry, which is a kind of raspberry or blackberry. Scientific name is rubus, but it does produce these delicious, kind of like orangey red fruits, but it looks just like a raspberry. And then on the right-hand side, we've got mugwort, which is a non-native European, somewhat invasive plant, so one that we would readily call a weed. But it's called mugwort because it has long been enjoyed in our mugs. So the leaves can be steeped in hot water for a tea as a digestive aid and a mild sedative. And it's also been used in the brewing of beer. Now, as we made our way along the Palisades cliffs, the temperatures were far higher than we had expected for early September. They were in the 80s. Our backpacks were far heavier than they really should have been, which is typical, no matter how many miles you have under your belt. And so we were kind of sorely reminded when we had these beautiful views of the Hudson and the GWB, we were sorely reminded how little we had traveled already. So there's a photo of Scott's kind of lamenting the mileage already. But along the Palisades cliffs too, we marveled at the history there. So the Palisades back in the 1800s were quarried, and they were destined to be quarried all the more. And had it not been for the New Jersey Women's Federation of Clubs, who rallied for their protection and contacted their politicians to do something about it, these cliffs may not be here for us to enjoy today. So by 1900, the Palisades Interstate Commission was formed to acquire these cliffs and protect them for perpetuity. And some of this massive rock now has been placed as a route for the trail. So here we've got what's called giant stairs, which are just some beautiful stone steps that you walk along the long path. And you'll pass a monument to the Women's Federation of Clubs. Looks like a stone castle, pretty neat to come across in the woods. And again, the views along the Palisades cliffs are just phenomenal. I will read you an excerpt again of our ascending one of the kind of major mountains that you do climb along the Palisades. These are not major in the grand scheme of things, but they are summits, just relatively low compared to some other mountains that we would summit later. When we finally summited the peak of Hook Mountain, although enshrouded in fog, we could still make out the elegant arches of the Tappan Zee Bridge in the distance, the Hudson River flowing strong below and behind us, and the Palisades cliffs across which we had already walked. Silhouettes of mullein stood shadowy and surreal. Their stalks, dabbed with yellow flowers at the tips, glowed faintly through the mist. Mullein is a non-native plant that can grow to 6 feet tall and normally resides along railroads and roadways, but scarcely ever atop a mountain. These skeletal stalks offered a strange contrast to the native prickly pear at our feet. We had encountered this rare cactus on a couple exposed cliffs in marginal struggling communities in the Northeast, but here we found plump spiky paddles clumped together on either side of the trail. These paddles provide a succulent vegetable after the spines and skins are removed, as do the fruits of prickly pear that develop after their large golden flowers are pollinated and fall away. Although we have found Hook Mountain in the gray, prickly pear was evidence that this rocky cliff oft experienced days of sun, providing a special microclimate for a plant more suited to the warm sandy coast. We also enjoyed wildlife. So here, a welcome friend, a buck, on the left, and then some not so welcome friends. So this is a giant anthill. Little did we know how serious the red ants are in New York State. From my understanding, we do have some non-native European red ants, and they are particularly vicious. You will not feel them biting you. And sometimes their bites will not even appear on your body for up to 48 hours later. So that's exactly what happened to us while resting atop the Palisades Cliffs one evening. We were bitten up and didn't realize until it was about 36 hours later when Scott awoke in the tent with very red bumps that had morphed into very uncomfortable pustules. So let me read you an excerpt. Those little bites that we had seen 2 nights ago in the Time Hotel were now not only scarlet and angry, but some the size of $50, each with a pus-filled pimple at its center. Closer inspection revealed more on his back and his arms, inside his armpits, up his neck, and even several on his nipples. I pulled up my shirt and saw that mine too had morphed into raised red bumps on my stomach and rib cage, but nowhere even close to the severity of his. Plantain is not going to do shit, he declared. What the hell is this? He repeated, itching more. Try not to itch them. Well, they itch like heck. Here, chew these up and put them on your bites, I ordered, passing the leaves to him. You chew them, he barked back. So the leaf that you see here is the plantain leaf that we're referring to in this excerpt. And I did get him to chew those plantain leaves up. And basically what we made was like a spit and chew poultice. So you could apply that atop a bug bite and it will reduce the swelling and itching, essentially the inflammation, which it did relieve his inflammation and at least keep it from being so bothersome that he couldn't hike. We did eventually get to a pharmacy where we were able to get some Benadryl because he was definitely having an allergic reaction to these bites. And finally, we made some distance on the city. So here it is, far away and foggy. I believe we're about 50 miles in at this point. And we make our way into the Hudson Highlands. So firstly, in the Hudson Highlands, you're going to enter into Harriman State Park. And here we marveled at the large boulders, the abundant grassy woods with towering trees. We enjoyed walking across smooth rock, sometimes on the ridges, and struggled in the lower lands there as we walked through what was sometimes a bit of a boulder field. In Harriman State Park, you'll enjoy these stone lean-tos that were built by the CCC back in the 1930s. And we really enjoyed seeing sweet fern. So this is a native shrub, one that Scott actually introduced me to for the first time. And it is our most delicious wild tea. So these leaves, when they're green, so that lower leaf you see there, they can be steeped in hot water or infused in cold water, like a sun tea. Excellent as a digestive aid, and the Native Americans considered it a blood purifier. Many of the leaves at that time, as we were hiking through, looked like that upper leaf, so it was already turning kind of a mottled purple there with the oncoming of autumn. We also enjoyed cultivated, grapes gone wild, and wild grapes. And Staghorn Sumac, which is what you see on the right. So Staghorn Sumac is a native small tree that produces the scarlet fruiting cone. And we enjoy breaking that cone at the base, dropping it in our water bottle, letting it infuse for a few hours. We then remove the cone and then strain the liquid through a bandana to catch some little hairs that's inevitably always come off along with the flavoring, and then enjoy the lemony tasting beverage, so rich in vitamin C. Atop Long Mountain in Harriman State Park, you will find a plaque to Raymond H. Torrey, and he was a journalist for the New York Post. He had a popular column called The Long Brown Path, which paid homage to Home by Walt Whitman. And Raymond Torrey and Vincent J. Schaefer, who is the man that conceived of the Long Path, they together helped to map its route and also publicize the trail to get people out there hiking and interested in it. You'll intersect with the Appalachian Trail in Harriman State Park. Again, this is where I remember first intersecting with the Long Path. And I'll read you an excerpt. We were actually having an argument right before we came upon this sign. So hiking with your partner is not always sunshine and gumdrops. We hiked through the woods in silence and then trudged alongside a massive mountaintop marsh, obscured by vegetation for what seemed like an eternity, the croaking of frogs and chirping of crickets emanating from within its walls. The trail was eroded and thin as a ribbon, giving out beneath us, causing us time and again to nearly slide into the water. We cursed, we huffed. I wanted to enjoy the song, the smell of the marshland, the now golden dying light of dusk. But my heart felt like a paperweight, and my fists clutched the handles of my trekking poles so tight that my palms felt like they were on fire. Damn him for being so sharp with me. Damn it to hell that we wouldn't reach our goal for the day. And damn me for planning miles that were too much too soon. No, I hadn't planned to go 17 miles, but even with lower mileage, each day it seemed we hit a wall a couple miles before camp. Suddenly, we reached an intersection marked by a stately wooden post bearing numerous signs, each engraved with trail names and the mileage to their corresponding destinations. I couldn't even remember when we'd left the marsh. I'd been so lost in my thoughts, but I knew surely where we were now. I peered with all my heart down the trail that crossed ours, letting my gaze settle on each white blaze that seemed to glow in the darkness of the forest. Each blaze spurred a longing, a love from deep within me. The Appalachian Trail. This was the very same sign that I had spied a decade before when hiking the AT. Now here I stood before it again, but this time with Scott by my side. My fists loosened their grip and a calming current flowed through me, from my head down to my toes. So that little sign helped to get me out of my funk, and he as well. In the Hudson Highlands, you'll also discover Schunemunck State Forest. I'll have to think about that one. But Schunemunck is this incredible ridge, which we had been completely ignorant to before through hiking the trail. You get gorgeous vistas off of either side of the ridge, and you'll encounter these boulders and these large rocks that look like they've just been placed by a giant there. Lots of dwarf pitch pine. And the evening that we made our way across the ridge, we actually started late afternoon thinking, okay, we'll make our way across and we'll be back down in the valley soon. We'll set up camp there. Little did we know that we had gone the wrong direction on the ridge. We had turned right when we should have turned left. So we carried on until the sun was setting, still wondering why we weren't off the ridge, but so enthralled with our surroundings that we didn't worry all that much. And we ended up setting up camp up on the ridge that night, and then had an interesting interaction with the resident coyotes. And the next morning, after traveling a little further yet in the wrong direction, realized our error and had to double back. I believe doubling back about 4 miles. So make sure you turn left and not right if you're traveling north. So Orange County. So after that experience, we were mighty glad to have some easier walking. And what you see here is the Heritage Rail Trail, which when we hiked the long path traveled from Monroe to Goshen. Now it has been extended. So we walked this for, I believe it was 11 miles, and then carried on for some road walking for a bit after that. It is a lovely break from the wilderness, so you'll get to enjoy ice cream and pizza along the way, and the various businesses. and also enjoy seeing some historical train stations. This is in the town of Chester. And as we hit the road, even the country road walking was pleasant. We had some beautiful sights. And we enjoyed more plants. So here is goldenrod on the left. Goldenrod is certainly in full bloom there in late summer. The yellow blossoms and the leaves can be steeped in hot water for a tea that's actually an excellent antihistamine. So goldenrod sometimes gets the bad rap for what causes our allergies, but it is not the cause of our allergies, but rather the antidote. And then on the right-hand side, we've got chicory, and this flower is certainly in bloom right now. The flowers, the leaves are edible, and the roots can be used as a coffee substitute. Into the Showangunks we went, and the Showangunks do actually begin in Orange County, so these two sections kind of overlap in that way. But the Showangunks, one of the most spectacular places you come across pretty soon is the Bashakil Wildlife Management Area. I'll read you an excerpt. The long path meanders through the 3,100-acre Bashakil Wildlife Management Area, home to the largest freshwater wetland in southeastern New York, on a grassy retired railroad bed through a narrow corridor of black and gray birch, oak, and maple. Beside us, the expansive waters of the Bashakil Marsh reflected the last rays of the day's sun. As we strolled this seemingly endless tunnel of greenery and starkly contrasted pale and dark barks, the birds sang their evening songs, and crickets pulsed with excitement for the coming darkness. So there on the left-hand side, you can see our walk in the evening. And on the right hand, you can see the Bashakil Marsh there in the morning fog. The Bashakil Marsh is home to many amphibians and insects and birds and plant life. So we delighted in seeing the smallest snapping turtle we'd ever seen, about the size of a quarter, or maybe a $50 at best, covered in mud, and also a black northern water snake. Scott does not much enjoy snakes, so he scurried on down the trail while I took a picture. We also enjoyed nibbling autumn olive fruits. Now, autumn olive is a non-native invasive shrub that we certainly do not want to encourage its growth, but it is very much here in pristine places too, like the Bashakil Wildlife Management Area. These fruits are delicious. They taste like cranberry, and they do ripen in autumn, so keep your eyes peeled for those. Now, the Showangunks really become spectacular and honestly somewhat otherworldly once you get up on top of the ridges. So here on the left-hand side, you can see this is a classic Shawangunk ridge. So the Showangunks have long had a history of burning, dating back to the first millennium BC. The Showangunks have burned, and it's thought that initially that was due to climatic change with periods of drought and in turn increased fire, and that established a fire tolerant or fire dependent ecosystem. So the plants that flourished were those like blueberry and huckleberry, sassafras, wintergreen, oaks as well. And then those plants they will increase fire because of their flammable nature. So fire was perpetuated, and the Native Americans were the first to notice that after a fire, berry yield increased, as did acorns from oaks. So they took to burning these ridges purposely to increase the yield of these foods, and then the settlers followed suit. So for many years, these the Shawangunk Mountains have burned. That's why that has that kind of stark stark appearance. Pitch pine too, that's another fire-tolerant, fire-dependent tree. And on the right-hand side, you can marvel at the white rock that you'll see in the Shohari. So here's some of those plants I just mentioned. I will read you an excerpt. But amidst all this white light, the kaleidoscope colors of autumn periodically burst forth. We stopped more than once to admire the leaves of sassafras, which are already unique given that this tree produces 3 differently shaped leaves. One with 3 lobes, another shaped like a mitten, and one with smooth edges. But now they were green, painted with the most vibrant reds and oranges on which we'd ever laid eyes. Beside us, the green-leaved berry bushes also bled red, and at our feet, wintergreen plants were colored deep plum, bearing scarlet berries that hung daintily on cane-shaped slender stems. Whereas at first this ridge had appeared barren, it was evident it bore an abundance of food and medicine. So the roots of sassafras, they were used in our old-time root beer. The berries of blueberry, of course, are edible, but the leaves too can be steeped in hot water for a tea that is beneficial for fighting off urinary tract infections, similar to the fruits of cranberry. And wintergreen on the right, that contains methyl salicylic acid, which is a muscular analgesic and an anti-inflammatory. So we could make a tea of those leaves by steeping them in hot water. That would be helpful for reducing aches and pains. We could simply nibble on the leaves as well. And those berries are edible. And this plant too was collected for that methyl salicylic acid, or what we more commonly call oil of wintergreen. So you'll come across Sam's Point, very popular destination in the Shohari, and worth the walk. It's actually a pretty easy walk from the parking lot. It is a little bit of a climb, but you'll get a gorgeous view of the Hudson Highlands. And Sam's Point there in Minnewaska State Park Preserve is the only dwarf pitch pine forest in the world. So that which has been officially designated as a dwarf pitch pine forest. And that is due to the predominance of dwarfed pitch pine. And what you're seeing here is a pitch pine cone. This is Verderkirkhill Falls, which I hope I got that right. But these falls plunge 180 feet down to the water below, and you'll walk right along the edge of them. And there on the right, foggy in the distance, is the Mohonk Mountain House atop that ridge. You'll see that from High Point in the Shohari. Now we enter into the Catskills, which, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we traveled through for nearly 100 miles. It was 94 to be exact. And in these 94 miles, you will summit 11 high peaks, which can be quite the challenging climbs at times. On the left there, that's Scott going up Slide Mountain, which is the highest peak in the Catskills. However, that climb was actually relatively easy. And then on the right-hand side, that is a more typical climb in the Catskills. So kind of clambering over boulders, over twining roots on the ground, sometimes literally climbing your way up and over rock. But atop these high peaks, you are well rewarded with the best vistas you'll get really along the entire hike. And a special thing happens atop these high peaks as well. I'll read you an excerpt. Gradually and then suddenly, the woods dramatically changed. Its eerie silence drowned out the melody playing in our heads. and its gnarled tree roots, sharply turning trail, and lichen-covered rocks demanded our attention. We'd entered the boreal forest, a forest that normally exists in more northern regions, like Canada and Alaska. However, it also exists here in the Catskills above 3,500 feet. This forest is nourished by the moist air from the southeast and southwest that rises over the Catskills, cools, and turns to rain or snow. Conditions are cold and moist on the high peaks and support regionally rare plants, those one is likely to encounter in a lowland or deciduous forest. Just like that, we had climbed into a whole different biome. And some of those boreal forest plants or high elevation plants that you'll find in the Catskills, one of them is white birch. Another is mountain ash, or what we call rowan berry as well. Those berries are edible, rich in vitamin C. And then we have Indian cucumber on the right-hand side. Those berries are not edible, as delicious as they look, but the root of Indian cucumber is edible. We have bunchberry on the left without its berries. They've already come and gone at this point. This is the smallest family member of the dogwood family. And then hobblebush on the right with its ripening berries. We spied a good bit of old man's beard, and you can see why this lichen is called old man's beard by that picture on the left. Scientific name is Usnea. There's many different species of Usnea. All of them are antibacterial, anti-protozoa, antifungal, antiviral. So it could almost be considered a sort of antibiotic. Great for fighting any kind of infection, internal or external. Now, upon reaching these high peaks, we were mighty excited. We were feeling stronger. We were feeling good. We'd both gotten our trail legs at this point. I'll read you an excerpt. "You did it, love," I whispered to Scott once we'd quieted down our whooping and hollering. He beamed. Although we'd been pushing ourselves harder than ever while on this hike, looking at him now, I couldn't help but notice how young he looked. Even with his normally smooth-shaven face now bearing a full beard, his smile was boyish, the lines in his brow softened, and his eyes bright. His hair was a wild spray of blonde curls rather than well-groomed. It was as if in just a couple of weeks he'd hiked off years of stress and worry, returning to himself. Hiking as a way of doing that, peeling back the layers that we accumulate over time. But, once atop the peaks, you always must come down them. And descending was oftentimes more difficult than ascending. So here is the descent down Slide Mountain, on which you are given 3 solid wooden ladders. And this is also on the other side of Slide Mountain, so things do get tougher. This is about I believe about a 20-foot drop on the left-hand side and a 15-foot drop on the right. So both of these did involve our throwing our backpacks off the top of these ledges and descending as carefully and as cleverly as we could. Now I bring you back to this summit photo. This is the Summit of Blackhead. And we found ourselves ascending this mountain late in the day. It had not been our plan to ascend the mountain at, I believe it was about 5:30 in the evening, but there had been no water down in Dutcher Notch, and we were very low on water. So we wanted to get to the other side and get to the Batavia Kill, where there was also a lean-to. So we decided to go up and over, but again, going up was easier than coming down, and we actually ended up descending in the dark, in the pitch black. And Blackhead is described as one of the steepest descents in the Catskills. I will read you an excerpt from that experience. This was probably one of the dumbest decisions we had made yet, but these are the terms of the trail. Once you've set your course, there's no turning back. By the light of headlamps that illuminated no more than 15 feet ahead of us, we shuffled our feet over loose rock and eased our way down steeply sloping smooth rock. We scrambled down more boulders using birch roots when available like ropes and skated over screen. The trail at times looked like a black chute that, should we lose our footing, could send us sailing right off the side of the mountain and into the starry sky. Lights from homes and roadways speckled the surrounding mountains and valley below. And as the night grew darker and our eyes adjusted, the sky was ever punctuated with twinkling pinholes of starlight. For a time, my fear vanished, replaced by sheer exultation. This was just us, two bobbing headlamps in the darkness in Blackhead Mountain. And in the Catskills, you will intersect with the Finger Lakes Trail, which when we hiked the long path, this was the Finger Lakes Trail's eastern terminus. As I said, that's now a top slide mountain. But it was pretty special to be standing there with Scott because the last time I had been at this terminus, I was finishing my hike on the Finger Lakes Trail. And just a few days later, I would walk into the business that Scott managed, and I would meet him, strike up a conversation, and we would begin our relationship. So it was special to 2 years later be back there at that point with him. You'll also encounter the the Devil's Path, which is allegedly the most rugged path in New York State. It travels for 22 miles through the Catskills, maybe 24 now. Thankfully, the long path only follows it for about 8 miles, but we were a bit nervous taking that one on, and it is technically challenging. It certainly is. And before leaving the Catskills, we were oh so delighted to meet this barred owl in the middle of the day. It was high noon. It was very hot. Our temperatures actually throughout the Catskills were often very hot. There were days that we were up above 90. So that too had increased the challenge we felt. But this barred owl, if you read Love in the Long Path, you will see many a mention to a barred owl at camp in the evening, hooting away. And so when we saw this owl, we wondered if perhaps this had been the fellow that had been following us since the start. So leaving the Catskills, you enter into the Shohari Valley. And through the Shohari Valley, there will be some road walking, but the road walking is on country roads. It's very pleasant. We enjoyed seeing farm animals along the way, picturesque landscapes. And it was in the Shohari Valley that finally our temps dropped. And after hiking for several weeks in those high temperatures, we were no longer prepared for the cold. I'd sent home a good bit of our cold weather gear, our heavyweight sleeping bag, because we thought, oh, we'll cut the weight. And so we had some warm gear, but not quite enough. And this day in particular, we hiked for the whole day in rain on and off, and then had to camp in temperatures that went down to freezing. So I'll read you an excerpt from that experience. Sometime after midnight, I awoke feeling like someone had beaten my body with a hammer. All my bones ached and my joints felt so stiff it was painful to move them. My sleeping pad was no defense against the cold earth beneath us. I rolled over to alleviate the pressure on my hip bone and left shoulder, and as I did, Scott too rolled over with a deep groan, wincing. Apparently he felt the same. It was just so cold. I felt as if I could feel every mile we had walked on this trek, every single one. We awoke roughly every hour to roll over, and so together we rotated, like a rotisserie chicken, throughout the night. So thank goodness for body heat. And boy, was I grateful when I got up in the wee hours and walked outside, saw the frost by the light of my headlamp, and looked at my watch, realized it was about 5 a.m. and soon we'd be able to get moving again and get warm. So that last photo and this one here, we are in Minekill State Park. Beautiful stretch of trail through the Shohari Valley. And with all this cold and all these miles, our appetites were definitely increasing, and that too, we needed to be planning better. So this was on the last day before a mail drop, so our reserves were getting pretty skimpy. This is a peanut butter cracker bagel sandwich. I wouldn't recommend it. So we were mighty pleased when we came across this group of sweet souls. So this is a community called Panther Creek Arts. They are an arts community. They do theater together and concerts and all kinds of activities. And we found them in the tiny hamlet of West Fulton, or should I say they found us. We were road walking through the town, which is just a couple of streets. And they were having a picnic outside of their community house. They said, "Hey, hikers, where are you going? Are you hungry?" And so we enjoyed feasting with them for the afternoon, made some friends, learned about the trail ahead. Trail magic can mean just so much. The company of our fellow human beings, generosity, while you're out there hiking day after day. And we had a number of instances of trail magic along our hike. So just before finishing up the Shohari Valley section, you will ascend Vroman's Nose, which is this prominent cliff outside of the town of Middleburg, and you'll get a beautiful view of the Shohari Valley. And finally, we entered into the Capital District. So this is the final segment of the long path. And you can see from this photo here, autumn is really popping. And I felt as if we were getting a taste of what the Adirondacks would look like. We enjoyed several nice lean-tos in this section, built by volunteers of the long path. And this one here is Cotton Hill Lean-To, and at this point, I believe we were just a few days, I think, from the end. So we were finally starting to slow down, take our time, revel in being out there. We had a fire. The cool temps were persisting. First fire of the entire hike, and our tent is set up inside the lean-to there for extra warmth. But we also spent time here at this lean-to just reminiscing about our growth as a couple and how it had started off a little rocky on the trail, trying to coordinate and compromise on miles. Seemed I often wanted to go a little bit further than Scott. But in the end, we figured out a pace that worked best for us. It's lovely to, get to camp and say, "Hey, honey, you go get the water, I'll set up the tent, or I'll hang the bear hang, and you get dinner cooking." And as I said before, just to be so close to accomplishing a goal that we both shared. So I'll read you a short excerpt. "It was true. My love for Scott had already exceeded that which I thought possible. It was varied and deep and passionate, like a vine with 100 different tendrils that twined this way and that around my heart. But now there was a blossom, nurtured by having ventured together into the unknown. Together we navigated through the challenging times and persevered when we thought we might not. Together we also witnessed beauty and grace and recognized the undeniable magic of our earthly existence. These experiences cultivated trust and appreciation for each other, but deeper than that, a mutual reverence. This was a partnership, a companionship I had never before known. And the plants that we enjoyed in the Capital District, there were many apple trees gone wild, so trees that had been cultivated and were no longer tended to. So what a treat to come across these fruits. Oh my goodness, fruit is so special on a long hike. They were a little sour and a little hard, but hey, they tasted amazing to us. And we also made good use of white pine. So at one point, Scott fell in a creek and gashed up his knee quite good. So I made an infusion of white pine needles and soaked a bandana, applied that to his wounds to prevent any infection. And that was successful. And here is Mr. Wilsey. So this is our last night on the trail. And we have been doing some road walking and then also walking through many patches of private property where private property owners had given permission for the long path to travel. But we were growing worried about where we were going to camp. There was no camping allowed on those private property parcels. And again, evening was coming soon, and we turned onto this country road after coming out of an archway or coming through a hedgerow. And here was Mr. Wilsey, whom we did not know at the time, walking up his driveway with his walking stick. And he called out to us and he said, "You two are part of a very small group." He knew right away what we were doing. That small group being people who are through hiking the trail. And he's 92 years old. This man is responsible for all those parcels of land that we walked through. He had gone knocking on his neighbors' doors after he'd learned about the long path, telling them how they had to give permission to allow this trail to pass through. It was just so special. And that evening, he provided us with a place to camp up in his cornfields. And what a sight. What a campsite it was. I'll read you an excerpt. Just as Mr. Wilsey instructed, for the best view, we set up camp amidst the red clover on the other side of the corn at the top of the hill. He'd even supplied us with fresh water. I prepared dinner, and as we slurped noodles seasoned with the fresh parsley-like flavor of wild carrot seeds, we let our gaze settle on the blonde hay bales squat in the green grass below, the low ridge mottled in autumn hues, and the sharp angle of Roman's nose, blue in the far distance. The setting sun bled purple, blue, and blood orange throughout the clouds, providing a watercolor backdrop. That night, a full moon rose just as it had on our first night on the trail, and from our illuminated perch we could see a single twinkling light from Mr. Wilsey's lovely old farmhouse below. The air was cool, filled with a chorus of chirping crickets, and the night was peaceful. Several times we were visited by a deer that, startled by our presence, gave a huff, and a barred owl that hooted, hoo-hoo-to-hoo, hoo-hoo-to-hoo-ah, keeping vigil from the forest edge. So in the morning, we shouldered our way through the corn and carried on for our last few miles to John Boyd Thatcher State Park, where we would find the Hulderberg Escarpment. Now, the Hulderberg Escarpment is fossil rich. There have been fossils discovered here dating back, I believe, hundreds of thousands of years. And here's a view you can see from the Hulderberg Escarpment. And I'll read you an excerpt. When we reached a road crossing, we found a parking lot, a stone wall running its length. Beyond it, a veil of gray. The wind whipped as we left the shelter of the forest and hit pavement. We climbed atop the flat slate surface of the rock wall and came to stand. Just then, as if by order of the trail gods, the wind gusted hard, rolling away the clouds, revealing splotches of the faraway mountains. As our eyes adjusted to the spectrum of grays on the horizon, we spied the green mountains of Vermont, those mountains which I vividly remembered hiking on the Appalachian Trail in weather not all that different from today. It had taken me 11 days to traverse them, and every single day it had rained. When I reached their summits, I'd been equally entranced by their beauty, but alone in the heavy fog. There were now so many mountains I'd hiked over the years, so many peaks atop which I'd stood in awe, and some that I'd returned to so many times I knew them as well as I knew myself. But never until this journey had I known what it was to stand beside the man I loved and share that beauty, to be with another who would now move forward with the knowledge of this place, identical to mine own, a shared memory. So we did have a foggy view there. Foggy views on and off throughout the day. What did rain some on our last day. And here we are outside the visitor center at John Boyd Thatcher State Park, getting warm with some hot coffee before our final, I believe it was 5 miles to the end of the trail, but we were feeling very celebratory, feeling pretty proud of ourselves. And something special about the land at John Boyd Thatcher State Park, besides being fossiliferous, the land is largely made up of limestone, which easily erodes with precipitation. And so there are these sinkholes that just open up in the forest, these gashes in the earth, these crevices. And so there's actually signage throughout the trails in John Boyd Thatcher State Park warning you to stay on the trail, because if you don't, you may end up falling into the earth. So this is one of those crevices. And this is a vista called High Point as well, like that in the Shawangunk. And this is 1 mile from the end of the trail on Old Stage Road. So this is a lovely place just to sit and ponder and contemplate the miles you've come. And here we have reached the end. So the long path, as I said, the official end of the trail is on Old Stage Road. And when we reached the end of the trail, there was actually no sign. We'd learned about that from Andy Garrison, who is the chair of the long path. We chatted with him before leaving, and we said, okay, so we'll know we've reached the end when we see a sign, right? And he said, oh, there's no sign. So we had shared that with family during a phone call while we were hiking, and my parents thought it would be more fitting if we had a sign. So they crafted a sign for us. My father came to pick us up, and we nailed that sign to that tree, and it still stands there today. So if you hike the long path, you too can now get your picture at the sign. So before I take questions, here's some info for y'all, and I know Lauren has passed a lot of this along to you as well. But here is the book, and signed print copies are presently available through my website and through my blog. Print and ebook, the book will officially be released August 5th. So you can pre-order both print and ebook right now through places like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, Kobo, all those major online retailers. And then I believe they'll be sending those out August 5th is how that works. And then also we've got our hikes coming up, edible and medicinal plant walks, September 18th and October 18th. So I am going to stop sharing here.
All right. Well, thanks, Heather. This was really great. Your photos are gorgeous, and yeah, I think it's really inspiring some people. So we do have some questions in the chat, and some of them are questions that I have had myself. So one of our questions is, how did you figure out your food drops, like location-wise? How did you coordinate that?
Yeah, so there is an excellent online guidebook put out by the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. If you Google just Long Path New York, their link will pop up. And you can just go to the electronic, I think they call it the updated electronic edition of the guidebook. But that was very helpful for us. It told us what towns we were going to be going through. There's also a special portion of that is available now for backpackers that has been greatly expanded upon since we hiked the trail. That resource wasn't quite as complete as it is now, but it's very complete now from what I understand. And so that'll give you info for the post offices and what stores will be in each town. And that's a great resource.
Nice. Yeah. I had the same, a similar question to that, just wondering how do you coordinate that and figure out when you should be doing a food drop for yourself. So, because you'll end up with the bagel and peanut butter cracker.
Right. Yeah, unfortunate. That was really unfortunate. But usually we figured I think we usually did about 5 to 7 days worth of food, 7 max. That was usually about what we had to carry. And we were not pulling really long miles. I think our longest day was maybe 18 tops, but we were usually between 10 and 15. So if you're a hiker that does greater mileage, you could probably do what we did in a few days.
Right. Yeah. You took a little more than a month, it sounded like, right?
Right.
Yeah. So here's another question too about trail conditions. So was there any section of the trail that was particularly dry? And if so, how much water would you carry? So I think this one was posted while you were talking about looking for that. So you wanted to get to the spring because you had been running out of water. So
yeah. So I would say there were spots in the Catskills. Now I don't know if I could tell you off the top of my head, besides that Dutcher Notch area, that were particularly dry. But remember too, we were hiking in autumn. So autumn's going to be a very dry time of year. Probably if it had been spring or summer, we would have been fine, or earlier in summer. So late summer, early autumn is going to be a rough time for finding water. But overall, I feel like water was pretty good. It wasn't too much of a challenge for us.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know that that's often the question when I check my Facebook groups for the hiking groups. Someone is asking, are the springs running? Because they're planning ahead for a hike and just wondering about carrying water. So it's not surprising that question came up during this as well.
Well, so. I just thought of it too. There's another Facebook group called the Catskills Trail Conditions. Mm-hmm. And that's a great place to post and just ask questions like that. Hey, I'm doing this section. Does anyone know if the spring is running or the stream? And
yeah, I'm a member of that group, and I also I also follow that to hear about the trail conditions, and that is often a question, is they're wanting to know if the springs are running, which I don't think is a problem right now. We've gotten quite a bit of rain, so I think that the springs should be running fairly well any spring that you visit right now when you're hiking. So this is a pretty overall question that I think anybody tuning into this would like to know. So if someone wants to do something like this, like doing a long distance hike, but doesn't have the expertise that you have, do you know anyone that would do a group hike?
Well, group hikes, I'll tell you, it's something I would like to do. I would like to lead at one point. I'm not leading group hikes yet. I'm doing day hikes for folks, but in this region, do you have a suggestion, Lauren? Do you know?
There are groups that go out mostly for day hikes. I haven't seen any long distance, even doing overnights as a group. But I know that there are different meetup groups, like hiking in the Hudson Valley. A lot of people will post that they're doing hikes. There's a gentleman named Mike Clancy who leads a lot of hikes. I'm pretty sure that is his full-time retirement job. Seems like every day he's going out somewhere in the Catskills, the Hudson Highlands, mid-Hudson Valley. That guy is all over the place, and he's leading these hikes. I actually went on one with him last summer. He's a fast-paced hiker, so if you're a little bit slower, like me, yeah, I got left behind a couple of times. I was like, I can catch up. He goes pretty fast. Yeah, there are a lot of meetup groups that are out there, and maybe some that would be doing some more overnight long distance hiking. And I know that the long path is also something that a lot of people wouldn't just through hike, but they'll do it in pieces, much like the Appalachian Trail. So because it does run so long from New York City all the way up to the capital region, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that do it in little bits and pieces. So there might be people who are doing a section of the long path, and maybe they are just doing it in pieces, and you can join up with them. I know for where we are, where Mohonk Preserve is located, and how close we are to Sam's Point and Minnewaska, the long path, it actually literally goes through my backyard. The falls that I cannot pronounce correctly either. Yeah, they're literally behind my house. So like the long path goes right by in my neck of the woods, like literally.
Oh, so, that's awesome.
Yeah. So it is absolutely gorgeous, and I realized like, oh yes, I have hiked sections of the long path on my own, just going out and exploring. So, and that's probably what a lot of people will do as well. So I'd say, search different meetup groups and check in with some of the hiking groups that are on social media. So the Catskills Trail Conditions and Hiking the Hudson Valley. There's lots of great hiking.
Yeah, Friends Path, that's another one. Yep. And I know too, just through the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, if you become a member there, they do guided hikes. So you could go on like a shorter day hike, meet some folks, see if you can get a group together to go on an overnight. Yeah. I mean, the long path, in some ways, you could pick a section that would be more populated, where you'd have more people around that you would feel secure, like in say the Harriman State Park would be a great place. Where else along certain parts of the Catskills too, because there's other parts where you're not going to really run into other people. So if you want that security, you might be better off picking a more popular destination too.
Sure. And the fact that the long path covers Slide Mountain, I know that one's very popular since it's the highest peak in the Catskills. A lot of people want to check that one off their list. So there's a good chance that you're not going to be the only one on the trail when you go and do that. So yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it's a good peak to do as well, because the trail's not overly challenging as something in the Devil's Pass, say.
I would just recommend that this is one of your first Catskill peaks, going up it and then coming back down the same way you went up, the easier ascent, which we went up from. I think you could park at the Denning Trailhead. Oh goodness, I'm racking my brain.
Yeah, I think it's the Denning Trailhead that has the easier.
The
easier ascent.
Because I'm not sure how we would have gotten down those cliffs if we weren't together. Honestly, I mean, we used each other. Like, I ended up getting on my belly at one point and helping to lower him down, and then he was there to get my feet at the bottom. And there was nothing in the guidebook about that. Maybe there is now. Maybe
there might be now. Maybe someone was like, I think people should know about this.
Know that. Maybe they're so infamous it wasn't necessary to be in there.
Yeah, and it does sound like the long path has a lot of different sections. Some very easy, as you said, like the rail trail. It's obviously very easy, but then some are a little more challenging. So we have a couple more questions here. Ooh, are coyotes dangerous? I want to do this solo, but it makes me nervous.
Oh no! Don't let that scare you away. No. So coyotes can be scary. And for us, this was the closest encounter I'd ever had in my life, and like I said, we were camped up on the ridge where hikers never are camped, in between these large boulders. I mean, just this little patch of earth. And that evening we heard howling off in the distance, which is pretty cool to hear far away. And then suddenly this howl went up like right next to our tent, and then another howl, and we realized we were between two of them. And we saw one trot by. But then sure enough, after he trotted by and he figured out what we were, they were again off in the distance. So that's the closest encounter I've ever had. I mean, more often than not, you just hear them howling in the distance. They don't want anything to do with people.
Yeah, and I found that to be the case as well. Usually just in the distance, if you do see one, they skitter out of the way faster than you realize, like what your brain can even comprehend what you're seeing. So yeah, they're pretty shy of people, so they will shy away. So they probably just didn't even realize that the two of you were there. Yeah, I think they were just carrying about, and then they realized you were there and took off, you know.
I think they were confused.
Yeah, like, wait, there's people here?
And that's something too, that's an advantage, I'd say, of hiking the long path over actually a more frequented trail, like say the Appalachian Trail. When I hiked the Appalachian Trail, I saw tons of bear, and they were not scared of me. And I know you were asking about coyotes, but bear has always kind of been my thing. Like I was scared of bear very much so when I first got into long distance hiking, and I encountered them all the time on the AT, but they were so used to frequenting campsites because hikers were staying at these campsites all the time, leaving food behind, being somewhat careless with food. And you're also crossing roads and going through towns where there's neighborhoods with dumpsters. And, we didn't see a bear the entire length of the long path. We thought we had one outside of our tent, but he too went on his way.
Yeah. Bear, like I said, I live very close to the long path, so bear are fairly common around here, but yeah, most of the time they kind of skitter off as well. So here's another question about how much you carry. So how much weight did you carry on average? And what food gave you the biggest bang for your buck? What worked best for you?
Yeah, so we carried about 30, 35 pounds usually. And I'm not ultralight either. Like you could get more ultralight than that. Back when I started long distance hiking, which wasn't that long ago, it was about 13 years ago, 35 pounds seemed pretty light. But nowadays, if you're even more gear conscious, you could get lighter than that. Most bang for our buck, let's see. Well, I'll tell you what our staples were. Lipton's pesticides, cheddar and pita, or cheddar and English muffins. We're vegetarian too, so that dictates some. Oatmeal, granola bars, kind of the standard fare, but that's one of the reasons why I love foraging, because you are eating kind of nutrient deficient food sometimes, especially when you're out for that length of time. It can start to make an impact. So if you know some wild greens to pick, you're at least getting some vitamins and minerals through those. You can add those to a Lipton's pesticide or Kraft mac and cheese. Same with knowing some edible fruits or edible seeds. You can then get some vitamin C that way, and protein through your seeds and nuts. So we enjoyed foraging and adding in more nutritious things to our kind of typical backpacker fare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always my thought too. It's like food.
Well, that's what got me foraging. After I hiked the Appalachian Trail, I was like, I bet you there was so much food out there I could have been eating, and I just didn't know how to recognize it.
Yeah, it is so true. Yeah. So our last bit of question is, if you had to do this all over again, would you do it in the same direction? Or do you think that the way you did it, like north to south or whatever, is the best way to go, and why? So
that's a good question. I've never considered going north to south on the long path. I bet it would work pretty well either way. Because either way, you've got some time until you hit the Catskills, which I would consider the most challenging part of the long path. So if you're kind of getting your trail legs still, really, if you start in the north or if you start in the south, you're gonna have some time to kind of warm up before you hit some really challenging mileage. Yeah, I guess why did we pick going south from south to north? I don't know. Maybe, you know what it probably was? We thought it was going to be very cold when we did this hike. I had never done a hike so late in the summer into early autumn before. And as you saw, that was not really our problem, not until the last week. But we were ready for cold when we started out in the Palisades.
And it was not
warmer down south to start.
I know that's a question a lot of people at the Appalachian Trail also have, where would you start? A lot of people start in Georgia and work their way up. And that's actually, there's another through hike, the Superior Hiking Trail, which I also follow, that's in Minnesota. And a lot of people have a debate, northbound or southbound, which way are you going on your through hike? Where do you start? And sometimes it's nice, I guess, maybe to end in a major populated area, so you reward yourself with a hotel and a warm shower and cushy beds and pillows. So maybe that, if you're thinking of ending in New York City,
that's a good point.
Right?
That's a great point.
Yeah, so that could be a reward at the end.
Go to a show.
Right, yeah, exactly. So I guess it all depends on how you're thinking you're going to end it, though ending it in such a beautiful location. Also, if you're going from the south to the north like you did, so.
Yeah, and also I think starting in the south too, you are starting in that more populated region. I mean, obviously, but you also continue through more populated areas like the Palisades. There'll be a good number of day hikers, Harriman, even parts of the Shawangunks. So you kind of gradually get further and further into a wilderness setting, which I thought was nice to.
Yeah, so there's pros and cons either way, and they're both excellent choices, whether you choose to start in New York City or if you choose to start up in the capital region. So I guess it's user's preference. I don't know. Well, our time is just about up here, so this has been really fantastic. I know probably a lot of people are looking forward to reading more and learning more about your hike on the long path. This was just like a small taste of it. And of course, I'm sure more people are going to be interested in learning how to forage some medicinal and edible plants. And like I said, we have those walks coming up, one in September and one in October. I think they're both on the 18th of each of those months. They are both on the 18th. I'm thinking about it. So just September, October, 18th. So yeah, look for that. The registration is open for that. And thank you, Heather. This has been really great. And I think a couple of people are inspired to go out and do some long distance hiking now in our own backyards, which is delightful.
Oh, well, thank you for having me and being such an awesome host and moderator. And thank you to all who attended. So I do hope that you step out on the long path and check it out if you haven't already and cultivate your own love story, long path.
Yes. All right. Well, have a good evening, and everyone out there have a great evening. This has been recorded, so I'll send out the link to everybody. It'll be on our webpage as well for lots of people to see.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Good night.
Have a good one, everybody.